Full Screepy, the potato salad was already made before I remembered there was no one coming to eat it. I don't know why I made it. Muscle memory, maybe. 30-some years of Labor Day weekends, and my hands just knew what to do before my brain caught up with the calendar. So there it sat on the kitchen counter in Gerald's mother's old ceramic bowl, covered in plastic wrap, enough to feed 12 people who were not in my house and were not coming. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my phone. The house was very clean and very quiet, the way houses get when they've been prepared for company that isn't arriving. I had washed the good tablecloth. I don't know why I'd done that either. Renee's Instagram account is public. I want you to understand that it's public, meaning she made a choice every single day not to restrict it, not to limit who could see what she posted. I know how these platforms work. I manage social media accounts for 3 small nonprofits as volunteer work, and I understand that a public account is a statement. You are choosing your audience to be everyone, including apparently me. The photo was bright the way beach photos always are. Overexposed and joyful. Marcus had his arm around Renee, and she was laughing with her head tilted back the way people do when they want the photo to look like they weren't thinking about the photo. My grandchildren were in the water behind them, 2 small, blurry shapes of happiness. Marcus's sister Patrice was there too, in the corner of the frame, shielding her eyes from the sun. The caption said, "Best trip ever, when she's not around, lol." I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it the first time. I understood it perfectly the first time. I read it again because I wanted to be the kind of person who needed to read something like that twice before it registered, and I am not that person. My hand was steady. That surprised me, actually, how steady my hand was. I set the phone face down on the table. I looked at the ceramic bowl on the counter. I thought about Gerald and about all the Labor Days that used to fill this house with noise. Then I picked the phone back up. I said, out loud, to no one, "Well, now I know exactly what I'm working with. Before I go any further, I want to say this. The names in this story have been changed, and certain details have been adjusted to protect everyone involved, including myself. But the feelings are real. The experience is real. And if something in those first few minutes landed somewhere tender for you, I hope you'll stay, because I think by the end you'll find it was worth sitting with. I also want to ask something before we go any deeper. Drop your city or your country in the comments right now. Just that, where you're watching from. Because I have a feeling I'm not the only one who has ever made too much food for a holiday that quietly stopped being hers, and I'd like to know who's in the room with me today. All right, let me tell you how we got here. My name is Eleanor, and for 38 years I made a living out of making people feel like they belonged somewhere. That was the actual job, underneath all the logistics. Clients hired me to manage corporate galas and private celebrations. The seating charts, the vendors, the timelines, the 10,000 small decisions that determine whether a room full of strangers leaves feeling like we've known each other for years. I was good at it. Not because I was naturally warm, though I hope I am, but because I learned early that belonging is something you can engineer. If you pay close enough attention to people, you watch, you listen, you notice what people need before they know they need it. After 38 years, that habit doesn't switch off. It just follows you home. I retired at 65. Gerald died 14 months later. It was his heart, and it was fast, and I am not going to spend much time on that part, because even now it is the kind of loss that doesn't have edges I can describe cleanly. What I will tell you is that Gerald was the reason Labor Day mattered. He was the one who started it. The summer Marcus was 4 years old, just a backyard gathering, paper plates, a borrowed folding table. He said every family needed one day a year that was non-negotiable, a day you showed up for regardless of schedules and distances and whatever friction had accumulated since the last time. We never missed one. Not in 31 years. The tablecloth is white linen with small blue flowers along the border. I ironed it every year the night before. The potato salad recipe came from Gerald's mother, and Gerald called it proof that I loved them, because I made it every single time, even though it takes the better part of an afternoon. My grandchildren's heights are penciled on the back of the pantry door, their initials and the year, going back to when the oldest one could barely stand steady enough to be measured. That door is one of my most valuable possessions. I have never once considered repainting it. After Gerald died, Labor Day became mine to carry alone. I carried it carefully. I think I made it better. Actually, the way grief sometimes makes you precise about the things that still matter. Marcus always came. His sister Patrice always came. The grandchildren grew taller every year on that pantry door. Marcus married Renee 6 years ago, and I want to be honest with you. I tried. I genuinely tried. She was polished and a little guarded, and I told myself that was nerves, that being welcomed into an established family tradition takes time, that I, of all people, understood the pressure of walking into a room where the rituals were already set. The first Labor Day she attended, my youngest grandchild told me the potato salad was his favorite thing in the whole world. It was an unprompted 7-year-old declaration of love, and it made me laugh. Before I could respond, Renee put her hand on his shoulder and said brightly that next year maybe they could all make it together. She had some ideas for how to update the rest. I smiled and said that sounded lovely. I noticed. I just chose that day not to know what I'd noticed. The first cracks appeared around 8 months before that Labor Day weekend, and they were small enough that I could have ignored them if I were anyone other than who I am. But I spent almost 4 decades reading rooms. I know what it looks like when someone is seated too far from the conversation on purpose. I know what it sounds like when a vendor tells you something went wrong last minute that actually went wrong 3 weeks ago and nobody wanted to say so. I know the difference between an oversight and a design. Marcus started calling less. That alone wouldn't have meant much. He's busy. He has children. I'm not the kind of mother who needs daily proof of her son's attention. But when he did call, I could hear Renee in the background. Not participating in the conversation, just audible, offering clarifications. When I mentioned I'd been reorganizing the garage, I heard her voice faint and indistinct. And then Marcus said, "Mom, are you sure that's a good idea? Maybe we should come help with that." I hadn't asked for help. I'd been telling a story. In March, I asked Marcus when my grandson's birthday party was. He said they were keeping it small this year, just family, very last minute. I told him I understood, though I didn't really. 2 days later, Renee's Instagram showed a large party in their backyard. There was a balloon arch. There were at least 20 children. The cake had custom fondant work that takes weeks to order. I scrolled through the photos twice, looking for some explanation that made me feel less foolish for believing small and last minute. I didn't find one. It happened again in May with my granddaughter's event. Same phrasing, same discovery afterward. And then there was the health narrative. In January, I had a dizzy spell at the grocery store. It passed in less than a minute, and I mentioned it to Marcus only because he happened to call that evening, and I believe in being honest about those things at my age.
I saw my doctor.
My blood pressure was slightly elevated. We adjusted my medication. It was managed and minor and complete. But in April, my neighbor Helen mentioned in passing that Renee had told her I was fragile lately, that the family was keeping a close eye on me. I smiled and said I felt fine. I didn't correct her directly because I didn't yet want to make a thing out of it. But I remembered the word, fragile. I had never used that word. Marcus had never used that word. Renee had decided on that word, and it was traveling. When Marcus called in early August to tell me about the Labor Day trip, his voice had the careful, over-gentle tone you use with someone whose feelings you're managing. They'd rented a beach house, he said. It was going to involve a lot of walking. The house had stairs. They just didn't want me to overdo it, especially with my dizziness. He said we kept thinking maybe it was better if I sat this one out, but they'd planned something quiet when they got back, just him and the kids, low-key. I said I understood. I said it sounded like a wonderful trip. I did not say that I hadn't been dizzy in 7 months, or that I walked 3 miles 4 times a week at your Labor Day and weekends, or that I knew exactly what a seating arrangement designed to exclude someone looks like. I thanked him for thinking of me. I told him to have a beautiful time. Then I hung up and sat very still in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I would sit alone on Labor Day weekend with a bowl of potato salad no one needed, and I named the thing I had been refusing to name. This was not care. This was something else. The Instagram post was the detonator, but it wasn't the evidence. Not yet. The evidence required me to do what I do for 3 nonprofit organizations as volunteer work in my retirement. I looked closer. I took a screenshot of the post first. Not out of spite, out of habit. When you manage events and something goes wrong, you document it before it disappears. Renee's account was public, but posts can be deleted. Screenshots can't. Then I scrolled back. I went back through months of her account, and I did it the way I've been trained to review event timelines. Chronologically, looking for patterns, noting what's present and what's conspicuously absent. March. A photo of the family at brunch, captioned, "Drama-free weekends hit different." April. The grandchildren in matching outfits at what looked like a park event I'd never heard about. Caption, "Finally just us." May. Marcus and Renee on their anniversary, a restaurant I recognized as expensive. No caption, just emojis and a tag. June. A backyard gathering, at least a dozen people visible, none of them me. Caption, "Needed this." I clicked into the comment thread under the March photo. A friend of Renee's had written, "You deserve this energy." Renee had replied, "Seriously, the renovation budget keeps getting eaten by obligations, but at least we still know how to have fun, lol." I read that twice, then I opened my banking app. I have been transferring $800 a month into Marcus and Renee's account since 4 months after Gerald died. Marcus called it temporary. He said they were in a tough spot with the mortgage, just until Renee's job situation stabilized, just until they got through a rough patch. He used the word temporary 3 times in that conversation, and I remember because I latched onto it. Temporary felt manageable, temporary felt like love. It had been 19 months. I did the math in my head first, then I did it again on paper because I wanted to see it written down in my own handwriting. 19 months, $800, $15,200. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in one hand and the paper in the other, and I looked at the phrase obligations next to an eye roll emoji, and I understood that I was the obligation. I was the budget problem. I was the thing eating into their renovation plans while they posted about drama-free weekends and finally just us. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I did not throw anything or rage or collapse under the weight of what I was holding. I have managed events where the florist didn't show, where the caterer sent the wrong entrees, where the venue double booked, and we had 90 minutes to relocate 200 guests. I learned a long time ago that panic is expensive and clarity is free, so I sat very still and I got very clear and I began to plan. I called Dottie not to cry, not to vent. I called her because Dottie is a retired paralegal and the oldest friend I have left, and because I have always processed problems better out loud with someone who knows how to think structurally. I did not call Marcus. I did not comment on the post. I did not send a single text message to anyone in my family. If you have ever worked in crisis management, and event planning is just crisis management with centerpieces, you know that the first move you make in anger is usually the move you have to spend 6 months undoing. Dottie came over within the hour. We sat at the kitchen table with the potato salad neither of us had much appetite for, and I walked her through it the way I used to walk my team through a logistical failure. What do we know for certain? What do we suspect but can't prove? What is documented and what is hearsay? I showed her the screenshots. I showed her the bank transfers. I explained the 19 months of temporary help, the fragile narrative, the birthday parties I wasn't invited to after being told they were small and last minute. Dottie listened the way she always listens, without interruption, taking notes on the back of an envelope. When I finished, she said, "What do you want the outcome to be?" I had to sit with that for a moment. Then I said, "I want to stop paying for someone to erase me. And I want Marcus to understand what he allowed to happen."
Dottie nodded.
She mentioned that her nephew is a family law attorney, that if I needed formal advice about extricating myself from the financial arrangement cleanly, he'd talk to me as a favor. I wrote his name down. Then I took out a small notebook, the kind I used to carry to client meetings, and I wrote 3 things. What I am owed, what I can prove, what I am willing to do. I looked at those 3 lines for a long time. Then I said out loud, "I'm not going to confront him while she's controlling every conversation he has about me." Dottie raised an eyebrow. "So what are you going to do?" I closed the notebook. I said, "I'm going to become exactly the confused Fragile old woman they've already decided I am, and I'm going to let that performance do the work for me. Dottie smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who has worked in law long enough to know that underestimation is a gift if you're patient enough to use it. She said, I think that's wise. I think it was too. Over the following 6 weeks, I gave the performance of my life. I have been paid to perform composure under pressure for nearly 4 decades. I have smiled through kitchen fires, vendor no-shows, and guests who arrived drunk to black tie fundraisers. I know how to control a room by controlling myself first. This was no different, except the room was smaller, and the stakes were higher, and the audience was my own son. 3 days after the Labor Day post, I called Marcus. I kept my voice warm. I told him the trip looked absolutely beautiful, that I'd seen a few photos, and made me so happy to see everyone having such a wonderful time. I said I'd been thinking about what he said, about the stairs and the walking, and he was probably right. I had been a little foggy lately, a little more tired than usual. I probably would have slowed everyone down. The relief in his voice was immediate, audible. He said he was so glad I understood, that they'd been worried about how to talk to me about it, that he loved me. I told him I loved him too. I noted the relief. I noted the phrase, how to talk to me, as if I were a problem that required strategic phrasing. Then I hung up. 30-some years of Labor Day week, and I transferred the $800 I transfer every month right on schedule without comment. 2 weeks later, Renee invited me to Sunday dinner. I went. I played the part she had written for me with professional grade commitments, because if there is one thing I know how to do, it's deliver on a role I've been cast in. I was warm. I was slightly distracted. I forgot the name of one of the children's teachers, even though I'd remembered it perfectly well the week before. I seemed tired after dinner and declined coffee, saying I'd been having trouble sleeping lately, which was true, though not for the reasons I let them assume. My eyes, however, were working perfectly. I catalogued the room the way I used to catalog event spaces for problems. There was a new television in the living room, large and expensive, that I had not been told about. There was a weekend bag near the hallway closet, with a resort luggage tag still attached. Somewhere they'd gone recently that hadn't been mentioned. I photographed it discreetly with my phone when I went to retrieve my coat, the same way I used to photograph vendor setup errors for my records. Renee's guard was completely down. She made 2 mistakes during that visit that I recorded mentally before I recorded them literally. The first was during a conversation about Marcus's work. She said something about the lawyer we've been talking to about, and then stopped mid-sentence, smiled, and pivoted to asking if I wanted more water. The phrase hung in the air for half a second. The lawyer we've been talking to. I smiled and said water would be lovely. The second mistake came as I was leaving. Renee walked me to the door, and she put her hand on my arm with a gentleness that felt rehearsed, and she said, Eleanor, have you thought about updating your will, now that things have changed? I looked at her. I made my face soft and a little confused, the way you do when you're elderly, and someone has just asked you a question that's slightly too complicated for the moment. I said, oh, I haven't gotten around to that. It's still on my list. She smiled. She said that was fine. No rush. Just something to think about. I drove home in silence. Then I sat in my car in the driveway and recorded a voice memo on my phone, the way I used to debrief my event staff after every large function. Date, time, location, every detail I'd observed, every word I could remember verbatim. I saved the file with the date and the title. Then I went inside and added 2 new lines to my notebook. They have consulted a lawyer. They are planning for my incapacity. I called a family meeting 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I framed it as early planning. Just a casual get-together to talk about the holiday, make sure we were all on the same page. Very low-key. I made it sound optional but important, the way you do when you want full attendance without saying the word mandatory. Marcus and Renee said yes. Patrice said yes. I invited Dottie, because Dottie has been at every major family gathering for 20 years, and her presence wouldn't raise suspicion. I also invited Dottie's nephew, a family law attorney named Colin, and I introduced him only as a friend of Dottie's, who's helping me with some paperwork. No one asked what kind of paperwork. They arrived at 2 o'clock on a Sunday. I had coffee and cookies laid out on the dining room table. The white linen tablecloth with the small blue flowers smoothed carefully into place. It looked like every other family gathering we'd ever had in that room, except this time there was a folder at my seat. I let everyone settle. I poured coffee. I asked about the grandchildren, and Renee told a story about something charming one of them had said at school, and I smiled and nodded the way I have smiled and nodded at 1,000 client meetings where I already knew the vendor was lying but hadn't yet said so. Then I folded my hands on top of the folder and I said, "Before we talk about Thanksgiving, there's something I need to go through with all of you. It won't take long, but I need everyone to stay until I'm finished." The room changed temperature. Marcus looked at Renee. Renee looked at me with a slight, polite confusion that I recognized as performance because I had just spent 6 weeks performing myself. I opened the folder. I have spent 38 years walking clients through event timelines, budget breakdowns, and logistical failures. I know how to present information so that it builds, so that each piece lands before the next one arrives, so that by the end the picture is undeniable. I started with the bank transfers. Printed statements highlighted, organized by month, 19 months of $800 deposits. I slid the first page across the table to Marcus and I said, "This is what I've contributed to your household since your father died, $15,200. You called it temporary." Marcus opened his mouth. I placed my hand gently over his and said, "Let me finish, sweetheart. I have a lot of experience making sure everyone in the room understands what's happening." He closed his mouth. Next, I laid out the screenshots. Renee's Instagram account, printed and dated. The drama-free weekends caption. The finally just us post. The comment thread where she referred to me as an obligation with an eye roll emoji. The Labor Day post with the caption that had started all of this. Patris leaned forward. She picked up the Labor Day screenshot and stared at it for a long time. She said very quietly, "I was told you didn't want to come." Renee said you told Marcus you weren't feeling up to it. I looked at Patrice. Then I looked at Marcus. I said, "I was never asked if I wanted to come. I was told the trip wasn't appropriate for someone in my condition." Renee's face did something fast and complicated. She said, "Eleanor, you said yourself you'd been foggy, you've been having dizzy spells." I slid the final document across the table. It was a consultation invoice from an elder law attorney, dated 3 months prior, with Marcus and Renee's names on it. Dottie's nephew had helped me obtain it through a professional contact, perfectly legal, perfectly documented. The listed subject of consultation, estate planning and decision-making capacity options for elderly family member. I said I had one dizzy spell in January. My doctor cleared me in February, but 3 months ago, you consulted an attorney about my capacity to make my own decisions. The room was completely silent. Colin, who had not spoken until now, said in a calm and factual tone, "For the record, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes is fully competent, has been evaluated by her physician as recently as last month, and has this week executed updated estate documents and a durable power of attorney that reflect her current wishes." Renee started to speak. Marcus put his hand on her arm. Patrice was still staring at the screenshots. No one in that room needed me to explain what they were looking at. The shape of it was already clear. The consequences unfolded not like an explosion, but like a door closing one room at a time. Within 2 days, I sent a written notice through Colin's office to Marcus and Renee, informing them that the monthly transfers would cease effective immediately. The letter was professional and unemotional, the way you might notify a vendor that you're ending a contract. No accusations, no explanation beyond what was necessary, just a date and a signature. I updated my will that same week. I should have done it after Gerald died. I think I've always known that. But when you lose someone suddenly, you don't immediately believe you need to protect yourself from the people left behind. You believe, for a while, that love is enough, that trust is a reasonable foundation. It takes a while to understand that love and betrayal are not actually opposites. They can live in the same house, the same family, the same person's heart. Patris is now the executor of my estate and the holder of my durable power of attorney. I have not discussed this decision with Marcus. I did not need to. He understood it. The moment the ink dried on the document, Marcus came to my house a week after the family meeting. He was angry that first visit. He said I had ambushed them. humiliated Renee in front of the family, made assumptions I had no right to make. He said Renee was only trying to protect me, that everything she'd done came from a place of care, and that I was being paranoid and ungrateful. I listened to him the way I have always listened to my son, with the kind of attention you give to someone whose voice still has power to wound you. When he finished, I said, "All right, you're heard." He came again 2 weeks later. This visit was quieter. His anger had moved into something else, something sadder and harder to name. He didn't defend Renee this time. He didn't say much of anything. He sat in the living room and looked at the photograph of him and Gerald on the mantel, taken when Marcus was 8 years old, and he cried the kind of cry that comes when you've realized you can't take something back. I sat with him. I didn't touch him. I didn't offer platitudes or forgiveness I wasn't sure I had to give. I just sat very still and let him grieve the version of himself he was losing, the version who could betray his mother and believe it was love. That second visit was harder than the first. Renee's Instagram went private within days of the family meeting. The best trip ever post was deleted. I watched it disappear, and I noted without any satisfaction, just with clarity, that deleting a post doesn't delete the screenshots. The evidence lives in my documents folder, dated and saved. It will be there long after she has rewritten the story in her own mind. There was no dramatic legal battle. I did not want one, and without access to my estate or my financial decisions, Marcus and Renee had no leverage to create one. They had lost their only tool, the assumption that I was too fragile, too confused, too old to protect myself. What I experienced in the weeks after was not triumph. It was grief. I grieved Marcus even while he was still present in the world. I grieved the version of him I had believed in, the son who would never let his wife speak about me that way, who would never consult an attorney about my capacity without asking me directly, who would never choose another person's narrative over his mother's truth. That version of Marcus didn't exist. I think maybe he never had. The following Labor Day, I hosted again. It looked different. The table was smaller, not because I said it that way, but because the people who came were fewer. Patrice was there, and her children, and the grandchildren, who had chosen to show up because they wanted to, not because their parents had scheduled them. Dottie came as she always does. I had also quietly befriended 2 neighbors over the course of that year, of Labor Day weekends, women I had started to see regularly, who understood without my having to explain that sometimes the people who fill your house are not the people who raised you. The white linen tablecloth with the blue flowers was ironed and smooth. The potato salad was on the table. We measured the grandchildren's heights on the pantry door again. New marks, new years, the same pencil. One of the older grandchildren asked me why the door was so full of pencil marks, going back so far, and I told her it was a record of people growing. She asked if everyone who came to Labor Day got measured, and I said no, just the people who were part of the tradition, just the people who belonged here. She asked how we knew when someone belonged. I told her that was the question, wasn't it? The real question. And I said I was still learning the answer. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat at the kitchen table, and I looked at this smaller, truer gathering in my memory, and I thought about what I wanted to say to you, to all of you who are sitting with me right now, in whatever city or country you're in, 30-some years of Labor Day weekends who have eaten alone on a holiday that used to be yours. I want to tell you something clearly, and I want you to hear it the way I mean it. The table doesn't have to seat everyone who used to sit at it. It just has to seat people who are honest about why they came. That's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. It doesn't teach you that love is fragile. It teaches you that clarity is a gift. It teaches you that you are stronger than you believed when you were pretending everything was fine. And it teaches you that a smaller table filled with people who want to be there is infinitely better than a full table of people performing. You do not have to wait for permission to protect yourself. You do not have to believe that age has made you less intelligent or less capable of seeing what is right in front of you. And you do not have to keep paying for the privilege of being erased. The people who love you will not need you to be confused in order to justify their presence in your life. They will not require your decline as proof of their importance. They will simply show up and be honest and make space for you at the table without needing you to apologize for taking it. I want to thank you for sitting with me today. for staying through all of it. If any of this story landed somewhere true for you, I want to ask you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who is still in the middle of their own performance, still pretending everything is fine, still waiting for permission to know what they already know, and I want to invite you to stay, to subscribe. Not because I need the metric, but because I believe we have an ongoing conversation to have. Those of us who understand what it costs to finally stop pretending, those of us who have learned, sometimes late and sometimes painfully, that we are worth more than we've been told. You belong here, you belong at this table, and nobody has to apologize for that.